Hello, I would like to make this video about the Piedmontese language where I describe some features about this language and I give some information. So the Piedmontese language is a Romance language, so it comes from Latin. It is spoken in northwestern Italy in a region which is called Piedmont. Of course, this could be a very simple information, but the fact is that in Piedmont many other languages are spoken. Dialects, some are dialects of language from the regions nearby. For example, the Lombard language, the Ligurian language or Genoese language, the Franco-Provençal or Arpitan language, and the Occitan language, also Provençal language. So it's an Alpine dialects are both Franco-Provençal and Provençal, so they are not from coastal province, they are from Alpine province. And so you see these many varieties which are spoken on the mountains or in some provinces. But the main language which is spoken in Piedmont is the Piedmontese language. Then there have always been two official languages in Piedmont, which were French and Italian. Italian from the 16th century, and French was an official language for a longer time, but now it is no longer an official language. It was particularly the official language of the upper classes. It was common among the upper classes, and it was an official language in the valleys. So this was in the plain there was Italian as an official language for priests and for the chancellors and the notaries. They wrote in Italian, and then in the valleys they wrote in French. But also in Turin they wrote in French because the upper classes used very much the French language. So there was a bilingual situation as regards the Breton language, and there was a plurality. There were many dialects as regards the spoken languages, which is very common all over Europe, of course. Everywhere in Europe there are spoken dialects from each town, each village. So in Piedmont we used to say that there is the Piedmontese language, which is the main one, the first spoken one as regards the number and the position in the region. The main towns in the region speak Piedmontese. For example, Turin, and the Piedmontese names, they are Biella, Versailles, Cuni, Asti, Alessandria. These are the main towns. Then there is also Pinarol, Saluzzi, Fusan, Bra, Alba, Ivrea, Via Forte, and so on. So there are many towns, and some of them do speak the same, some others speak a variety, but they are all Piedmontese towns and where the Piedmontese language is spoken. So today the Piedmontese language is mostly spoken by elders. This is an information. If you expect to come to Piedmont and then listen to the language on the road, yeah, you may listen to the language on the road it is spoken between elders. Two elders may speak in Piedmontese, but if they are not Piedmontese because they came with some waves of immigration or if they are too young, they won't speak Piedmontese because it's no longer common among younger generations. By the way, I would like to say something about the definition, because in Italy there is some attitude to say that all these languages are dialects, and that is for some reasons, from a society point of view, it can be true, but it's not true from a linguistic point of view, because if they are not dialects of the Italian language, because they are too different and so they are not a part of the Italian language, then they must be part of some other language. So are they part of the French language? No, they aren't. So they are part of a separate language which is not Italian and it isn't even French. So it is a language in the middle, and there is not only one language in the middle, there are actually many languages in the middle. You will find the Lombard language, Ligurian language, Venetian language, Emilia-Romagna, So there is plenty of local languages which all came from Latin, so they share some features, of course, but they show also many differences. When we say that there is a Piedmontese language, we say that the Piedmontese language is a cluster of dialects which share some similarities. For example, I don't make example because I would enter in the field of the study of all these dialects, and so it would be a bit difficult but to explain in a few sentences. So I will just say there is a cluster of Piedmontese dialects with common features. You will learn the common language, the common Piedmontese, and so when you learn common Piedmontese, you basically learn the grammar of all the Piedmontese dialects and some of phonological features that are spread all over Piedmont, and they involve all the Piedmontese varieties. So when you will learn Piedmontese, you will learn also what makes Piedmontese Piedmontese. When I say the first definition of Piedmontese language means that Piedmontese is the cluster of dialects that make up the Piedmontese group. Then there is another feature, another definition of Piedmontese. When I say Piedmontese language, it is the common language. So because actually from these dialects, a common language came out, and this language came from the central market of Turin, which is called Porta Palazzo, the Palace Gate. And it was the Palace Gate because it takes its name by a palace which was in the entrance of the old town of Turin. And here there is a very large market. It's one of the largest in Europe. And this wasn't just a city market, it was a regional market where all the people from the region came and exchanged his goods. But this market was a very important market, and all the people from the region came there, and then they spoke a common language because they were from all over the region and each one spoke its way. So they found a way to speak, a common way to speak. So they took the dialects from Turin and made some changes, and then they started speaking it and spreading it to the other markets in the outer region, in the countryside. There were many other towns. Each of these towns had a market, but they started to borrow some words, some ways to pronounce from the dialect of Turin, because the main market was the market of Turin. And so from a market to the other, through the countryside markets, the language of the capital city was spread. This is the first thing that spread a common language. But also another thing that spread a common language is the army, because in Piedmont there was the duchy, and then there was also the kingdom of Sardinia. It was the kingdom of Sardinia, but actually Piedmont was a principality and Savoy was a duchy. So the kingdom Piedmont wasn't part of the kingdom was Sardinia, which is an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and the king was king of Sardinia. It wasn't the king of Piedmont, because this was the title. It was pretty complicated, but this was a dynasty, the House of Savoy, that had this title, which was a bit exotic, because when you are in Piedmont, you don't care very much about Sardinia, which is all over, which isn't even close to Piedmont, but actually the king of Sardinia was in Piedmont, and he lived in Turin. He lived in Turin in the Turin Royal Palace, and he lived there, and he learned from the servants, from the people around him. He learned Piedmontese, and so he spoke it. He spoke it, and then he spoke it also with the how can I say? He spoke it with all his generals and military leaders, and the military leaders then spread the orders of the king, which were told in Piedmontese. They spread it to the officials, and then the official to the soldiers. So the soldiers received their orders in Piedmontese, and this makes up the Piedmontese language, the Piedmontese common language, which was the language of the king, spread to the military hierarchy. So the Piedmontese common language was spoken in the markets, in the fortresses, in the military camps, by the officials, and then also by the soldiers. I've told you about these two definitions, and then there is a third definition, which is the definition of the upper language, which is the literary Piedmontese, the language which is written by the poets in the last century, in the 20th century, and a very good level literature was developed in Piedmont by major authors of the Piedmontese literature, and they started to clean up the language from all the Italian borrowed, all the words that were borrowed from Italian, and so all these long words were cleaned, and the language was it resembled a bit more the dialect of Old Piedmontese and the dialect of the countryside, which was a bit less influenced by Italian and French, and so it was considered better by the poets and the authors. When you talk about the literary Piedmontese, you talk about the third definition that you can give to the name of Piedmontese language. You can tell about the cluster of dialects that made up the Piedmontese language. So the cluster of dialects which share the same features, dialects of the same Piedmontese type, and then you have the language of the armies and of the markets, a common language, the common Piedmontese, which was mostly spread in Western Piedmont, and then you have the language of the poets, which is also a very fine language. So we have these three definitions. So this is the first video. I don't know if I will do many others to share some information in English, because I received many requests from all over the world, and so I said English can be the common languages that everybody understands. Then I may do the same video in Piedmontese. Okay, thank you for watching.